ask you, what does our nervous system do? What would you say to that question? What does our nervous system do? Alex? The feelings we have? You mean like emotional feelings? Reactions? What else? How about thinking? Like control of our body? Those things are associated with the nervous system. So our nervous system, part of it is about processing information. Our nervous system takes in information, which we call that a stimulus. And then processes that information coming in and responds to it. And so the parts of our nervous system, major parts, are the brain, obviously. The brain takes in information, processes it, and then determines what response there should be. We'll talk more about each of these as we continue on. Our spinal cord is important because our spinal cord takes information to our brain and from our brain. That's called our central nervous system, our brain and spinal cord. And then coming out of our central nervous system, what's shown here in green are our nerves. Nerves take these signals out to different parts of our body, bring it in to our central nervous system. You can see that basically we have these nerves spreading all throughout our body. They kind of almost look like blood vessels. They're marked in green. And so these main organs of the nervous system, they allow us to take in information, process it, and then respond if necessary. So we use these words a lot when we're talking about the nervous system: stimulus and response. So sort of some of the things we use to take in information from the outside are our senses. So our senses allow us to sort of perceive what's outside of our bodies. Senses like sight, feeling, hearing, smelling, tasting. Those are our senses. And each of those senses takes in information, sends it to our brain to be processed. So as you look up here, the pattern of light coming into your retina, back of your eye, gets sent into your brain through a nerve, the optic nerve. And it's really just a pattern of light. It's your brain then that takes that pattern of light and processes it so that you can actually see that the light is making letters and putting together those letters into words, understanding what they mean. Your brain is where that processing happens. Same thing with feeling the temperature of something or tasting something. So we call those things stimulus or stimuli, information that our nervous system receives. A response is how our body reacts to that stimulus. So, example. Yes. So if we see something coming flying at us, like an eraser, that's a stimulus. And what's the response?
Shocked.
Catch it, or it's coming towards your face. Move. Put your hands up. Try and deflect it. Okay? That's an example. How about, what's an example of a loud noise? Is what? Stimulus. What's your response?
Jump or yell.
Jump, yell, for your heart to race. Okay, if it scares you, your heart starts to beat faster. That's how your body responds to that stimulus. Okay, Alex, I'm not going to do it again. Look over your shoulder. What about, what's our response to a bright light? Like if you're in your house and it's kind of dark, and then you go outside and it's very bright.
Oh, like in the morning.
Yeah. So the stimulus is this bright light. How do your eyes respond to that?
You're like shocked. Right?
So yeah, you might squint at first, but then something happens.
They like warm up. Right?
Not really warm up. Yeah, your pupils, the black part of the side of your eye, changes size. When it's bright out, what does your pupil do? It gets smaller because it doesn't need to be open as wide because there's a lot of light. When you go into a dark area, what happens? It gets larger to let in more light so that you can see. Like if you ever were outside in your backyard or something, and then you come in and you have to go get something in the basement where it's really dark. You know, it's like you can't see. That's because when you were outside, where it was bright, your pupils were really small. And then you go in your basement where it's dark, it takes a little while. They don't open instantly. So it takes a while for your eyes to adjust, and in that time, things are very hard to see. So, stimulus, a bad smell, okay, a loud noise, bright light, those are stimuli. Information coming into our nervous system. And responses might be running away, jumping, hiding. Our pupils constricting or dilating. And these are important functions in living things. Living things have to respond to conditions outside of their body in order to find food, in order to get away from predator, and so forth. Okay, so let's talk about some of these organs a little more. The brain. Where's your brain? Inside of your cranium. Why in your cranium?
The stars would hurt.
Why in your cranium? Julia? Yeah, for protection. Okay? You have that hard, thick bone surrounding your brain because your brain is a vital organ. Okay? Your brain is made of nerve tissue. Nerve cells, which we call neurons. 100 billion neurons make up our brain. Pass around a brain.
Is it real?
It's real. It's modeled after Mr. Arcuri's brain, about the same size. But this brain comes from a sheep.
Why does it have to be from a sheep?
I don't know. So I'll pass around. You can look at it in the bag. Don't open it. But don't smush it either. But you can see the pattern. You can see the ridges that make up the brain. You can see there's two sides to the brain, two hemispheres. You can see the different parts of the brain. And the brain, like we said, takes in information, interprets it, processes it, and decides on the response. Okay? Humans have a very large brain in comparison to other animals, even other mammals. We have a complex brain. different parts that we're going to talk about.
What about elephants?
Well, I mean, they have a large brain as well, but in comparison size, brain to size. Okay, so, thank you, Mr. Riley. Yep. So, our brain is sort of the main processing point for this information. Connected to the base of our brain is what?
Spinal.
Spinal cord. So at the back of the brain, back here. Oh, it's up. Okay. We have our spinal cord. Pass around a little section of a cow's spinal cord. There's not really much to look at. You could just see sort of what the shape and the color. So the spinal cord connects at the base of our brain, goes down our back, inside of what? So where's our spinal cord located? In the vertebrae. So these are a model of our back, 3 vertebrae from our back. So the vertebrae are these bones, and sort of going through the back of these is a little tunnel through each one. This yellow represents the actual spinal cord that's running through those vertebrae. The vertebrae are separated from each other by these discs of cartilage. So anyone know, you might have a relative or somebody that has like a bad disc in their back and they have back pain.
Like a herniated disc.
Yeah, herniated disc, that's what it means. It means one of these discs is damaged. Sometimes they bulge out. And what happens is they can put pressure on the nerves. And pressure on those nerves often causes pain. So I'll pass this around as well. You can see this. So the spinal cord's protected. Okay? And that's important because it's really a vital organ. Connects our brain to basically the rest of our nerves. It's protected by the vertebrae of the back. So what you see here, as the brain comes down through the spinal cord, what happens is, coming out of that spinal cord are other nerves. It branches off to various places. Okay? You see that all the way down. When you get to the very base of the vertebrae, okay, in the sacrum and the pelvis, these nerves branch out to go down to the legs. Now, and here's just another example. This is from the bodies exhibit. You see the brain? Okay, this is just the nervous system.
It's real again.
Yep. See the spinal cord. And then coming out are all those nerves.
How do they hold them all?
I don't know. So, you probably know that what happens if someone's spinal cord is damaged?
Like some nerves don't reach the body and we get
It doesn't
paralyzed.
paralyze, does the bottom of your body.
Depends. It could paralysis. A person can be paralyzed. What does that actually mean? What does paralyzed mean, Alex? Yeah, they lose both feeling and movement to a certain part of the body. Okay. So, if a person, let's say we're in some sort of accident, and they had damage to their spinal cord down here, okay, their spinal cord got broken in half. Spinal cord is not like a bone. It doesn't sort of grow back together and heal. Okay? Most of the time those nerves will never reconnect. So if a person damages their spinal cord down here in their lower back, 2 things happen. First of all, information from their legs, they still have nerves in their legs. They have pain receptors, temperature receptors. But if a person had that damage and something touches their leg, that message comes up to those nerves, gets to part of the spinal cord, but then it gets to the brake, and it can't go any further. So that information from their legs never actually gets to their brain. So they have no feeling, because the feeling part, where that feeling temperature, feeling pain, things like that, feeling where your legs are, that is processed in your brain. So if that information can't get to the brain, person may have no feeling in their legs. At the same time, when their brain is telling their legs to move, the brain still works fine. It sends the messages to their that's going out to their muscles, but then that message gets to the brake, and it can't go any further. And so even though their brain is telling their legs to move, their legs don't move. So if a person damages their spinal cord like that, the higher up that it happens, the more damage it is done, the more loss of movement there's going to be. Okay? If a person damages their spinal cord way up here, then they may lose, so basically everything below that they lose the connection to. So if it happens up here in the neck area, they may lose the use of both their arms and their legs. Because again, if the damage is here, the brain sends a message to move the arms, but it can't get there because the nerves come out right around here. So the higher up the damage to the spinal cord is, the more dangerous it is, the more loss of use of different parts of the body. Al?
Say like they cut their leg back, they wouldn't even feel it.
No.
So it's like everything's like.
So like one of the things, you may have seen this on TV or something, one of the ways they help the test is they might poke somebody with like a sharp object. So that normally it would hurt and you would feel it. It wouldn't hurt you, but you would feel that. And they might poke and ask the person if they can feel it. And if they can't feel it, then there may be some sort of damage to their spinal cord. Alex?
What if it breaks like on the very bottom?
So basically, maybe way down here. So you would lose, there are some nerves that come out way at the bottom, and you would just lose the communication with those nerves. So yeah, it all depends on where that happens.
Could you get paralyzed from a herniated disc?
No, not usually. Usually a herniated disc puts pressure on those nerves, and they may hurt, and they may cause a lot of pain, but usually you don't lose, unless a nerve is actually damaged. No, it usually wouldn't cause paralysis. There are other diseases like that where the spine gets sort of constricted inside of the spinal cord and things like that. But
Can't you like fix it though?
what, a herniated disc?
No, if you break your spine.
No, so that's a good question, Christian. Doctors can't really, they can't like sew back the spinal cord and have it heal. The spinal cord does not regenerate tissue like lots of other body parts. So, if you get a cut in your skin, yes, there's a gap there, but it fills in with other skin cells eventually. Okay? In the spinal cord, that doesn't really happen. That's an area of research, though. Hello? Hi. No. No. Yes. Okay. No problem. So, yeah, that tissue doesn't heal, but it's an area of research where, because when a person is paralyzed due to damage to their spinal cord, doctors would love to have some way to help those nerve cells to regenerate, but they haven't been able to do that yet. Maybe someday, hopefully. The brain itself is made of parts. If you saw when I passed around that sheep brain, there's sort of different sections. You can see that there's sort of different texture and looks a little different, okay? And we'll talk about some of those parts. So sort of the largest part of the brain, that sort of outside layer you see in the front, that's called the cerebrum. And different parts of the brain are responsible for different things in our body. The cerebrum is where thought, your conscious thoughts originate, memory, voluntary actions, sort of many of the things you associate with conscious control starts in the cerebrum. Note that information, those decisions come from the cerebrum. Towards the back of the brain is this area called the cerebellum. It's much smaller. It's in control of some of the more unconscious parts of what we do. coordination, balance, movement, those sorts of things are controlled by the cerebellum. The medulla, down here, is also called sometimes the brain stem. That controls sort of our core activities that keep us alive. Breathing, our heart rate, blinking. Those activities are controlled down here in the medulla. So can you guess how did scientists figure out where different activities are controlled by? Anyone have an idea?
Testing them on people?
Excuse me?
Testing them on people?
Yeah, how would you test them?
Don't you put those like patches on their eyes?
Sometimes, but they figured a lot of this out even before they were able to do that, those electrical stimulus. What they would do often is study people with brain injuries. So that they would find when a person had injured a specific part of their brain, they would look at that person and see, okay, well, how did that affect them? How did that affect? Could they not speak anymore? Did they have difficulty with memories? Did they have difficulty with movement and so forth? So by looking at a person with damage to a part of their brain and seeing how that affected them, it kind of worked out where a lot of these different activities are controlled by. Christian?
So like if you stutter, it might be like from one of these being like injured?
It could be, but it might be just due to other things as well. So it could sort of yes and no, I think. So, this is a little bit of a different view. Okay, that large part is the cerebrum. Behind it, the cerebellum towards the bottom. And then on the bottom, the medulla.
Oh, so
So you guys seen this?
yeah.
Ever seen the movie Waterboy?
Yeah.
Oh, I love water.
Right.
All right. Y'all shut up now.
Oh, doesn't like be
Last week, we talked about the physiology of the animal brain as it pertains to aggression. Now, is there anyone here to tell me why most alligators are abnormally aggressive?
I know the answer to this question.
Anybody?
Oh, yeah.
Anyone? Yes, or you, sir?
Mama said that alligators are ornery because they got all them teeth but no toothbrush.
Well, Mama said alligators are ornery because they got all them teeth and no toothbrush. Wow. Anybody else? Yes, sir, you, sir?
Alligators are aggressive because of an enlarged medulla oblongata. It's the sector of the brain which controls aggressiveness.
That is correct. The medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is where anger, jealousy, and aggression come from. Now, is there anybody here to tell me where happiness comes from? Anyone? All right. Let's hear what Mama has to say on the subject.
Mama say that happiness is from magic rays of sunshine that come down when you feeling blue.
Well, folks, Mama's wrong again.
No, Colonel Sanders, you're wrong. Mama's right.
Mama's right. Something wrong with his medulla oblongata.
And then there's like two black eyes.
And he's like nice to him.
All right. All right, so our nervous system, including our brain, our spinal cord, our nerves, are involved with the communication of information from one place to another. And this happens through what we call nerve impulses. These are sort of signals that can be sent down a nerve cell.
Impulses.
So nerve impulses begin as a stimulus that the brain can interpret, and it sends out this message, it sends out a response. So we call an individual nerve cells called a neuron. And this is what it looks like. So it's a single cell. You could see, what do you think this purple thing is? That's the nucleus. And it's shaped, different than some of the cells we looked at and drew earlier in the year. It has this unique shape.
It looks like that thing that we looked at under the microscope. Like, I don't know what it looks like.
Oh, like the amoeba?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it has like this elongated section so it can carry information from one place to another. And many neurons can be linked together to sort of get information from one place to another. So a neuron is a nerve cell that can send and receive messages. So if we look at the nerve cell, we're going to just label some of the parts. So like the bulk of the neuron that's filled with cytoplasm and has a nucleus in it, it's called the cell body. It's where the nucleus is. Surrounding the cell body are all of these little sort of branches. They're called the dendrites. There's many of them on nerves. The elongated section is called the axon. And then the end of the neuron, these little sort of circular enlargements, that's the terminal.
Are you at the label this on?
Yep.
Oh.
So that's one individual neuron. Like we just said, our brain has 100 billion of these. And they connect to each other so that information can be sent from one to the other. I guess we'll talk about this tomorrow. So we'll save this next slide for tomorrow and talk a little bit more about what the parts of the neuron and what each of these things does inside of the cell.